All right, more finding the inverse. We tell you from the beginning that both these functions are one-to-one. So to find the inverse, we're going to go through the same process that we did on number one. We're going to change f of x to y, or g of x to y. Switch x and y, and in this case, we're going to switch x and y, and you're going to end up with two y's in your problem. And now we're going to solve for y. This is one where you want to maybe like make a little star. We are going to have to factor to get our y to solve for y. There's going to be a little factoring piece here. The first thing you want to do is clear your fraction, and you're going to clear your fraction by multiplying by the binomial in the denominator. Don't FOIL on the right side. Those cancel. You do that to get rid of it. Okay. On the left side, you're going to go ahead and multiply that x through. There's nothing else you can do. You've got to multiply that x through. So that's going to give you xy plus 6x equals 3y minus 5. At this point, the problem is a little bit of a mess, unfortunately. You have x's and y's together. You have y's on both sides. So what we need to do is get both of our y terms on the same side so that we can combine them together, so that we can isolate them. So I'm going to move the 6x over to be with the negative 5 and move the 3y over to be with the other y term. If you want to do that in 2 steps instead of 1, that's absolutely fine. Please do. So on the left side of the equation, we're left with xy minus 3y. On the right side of the equation, we're left with negative 5 minus 6x. We don't have any like terms yet. If you move the other direction, your signs will be opposite of what my signs are, but it is an equivalent equation. So don't worry about that. If you want me to check your work in class, just let me take a look at it. Okay, here is the key. So this is the step to maybe star. Once you have your y's on the same side, you want to GCS out a y. That's the step that students struggle with. Factoring is something that we are wonderful at, but sometimes using it in the middle of the problem instead of to solve a problem is a little bit tricky. So these two terms have y in common, so I can factor it out. When I factor out a y, my first term has an x left, my second term has a negative 3. And now that your y is separated, you can divide both sides by x minus 3. This kind of factoring situation is something that we'll use several times this year in order to solve different kinds of equations. We'll use it in exponential functions. We'll use it later in the year with limits. So it's good to get used to seeing that as a problem-solving method. And there's your inverse. Oh, sorry, we were working with G here, not F. You don't have to state the domain and range here. That's something that we'll work with in our rational functions unit. You can identify the domain of the original and the domain of the inverse, and that actually would give you both. So just to put that in your head, here, the number that we would exclude from our domain is the number that makes our denominator 0. So our domain here, our domain for g of x, would be all reals except for x cannot equal negative 6. for our inverse, x cannot equal 3. That would make our denominator 0. So the domain of our inverse would be negative infinity to 3 and 3 to infinity. And again, if we have the domain of both, then that gives us the range of the other. So our range for our original would be the same as the domain of our inverse. All right.